Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to our webinar. So some people are still coming into the meeting at the moment, and we'll give them a little bit of time to get in. But it's great to see so many of you here. My name is Katie, and I'm from the Devon Local Nature Partnership. And before we get going with our guest speaker, James, I'll just do some housekeeping. If you guys have any technical issues this evening, just click on your original link, and that should bring you straight back in. And if unfortunately we have any technical issues, we'll sort them as soon as possible. And worst case scenario, this YouTube will be going on this video will be going on YouTube, but that shouldn't happen, and we'll have a lovely talk. Throughout the talk, you can use the Q&A function to pop all your questions in there, and at the end of the talk we'll address as many of them as we can, and James will give you his insights. But we also have a chat function as well, so you guys can chat throughout the talk as well. So we've got lots of people in here, and I think we should get started. So our talk tonight is about what you can spot in Devon this autumn. So it's part of an initiative that we're running with Active Devon called Outdoor September, and it's all about encouraging people to get outside and connect with nature. And connecting with nature can be different to everybody. It could be simply just looking out your window or sitting in your garden, or it could be going on a walk or a cycle around your local nature reserve or the park down the street. And it's very different, and everyone's experience is unique. But there's a lot going on, and it's autumn, and we've got the changing of the seasons, and we want to highlight some of this for you so that you can feel a sense of place and connect with your local green space. And to help with this, we've got running this webinar this evening, and we've got our guest speaker, James Chubb. He is the countryside manager of the East Devon District Council. So he looks after all the District Council local nature reserves. And this is a large area. It's from Exmouth in the west to Seaton in the east. And James, if you'd like to come on and take it away, please.
Lovely. Thank you, Katie. Yes. It's the first time that I've actually been really pleased to be giving an online presentation today, because I've come down overnight with an absolute stinking cold, and had I been in the room with people, I think I would have had to call it off for fear of transferring horrible germs to people. So hopefully we'll get no viruses or anything tonight, and if my voice starts getting a bit croaky, do forgive me. But I think because I've got equipment and water and lemsip and all sorts of things going on around here, I'm actually going to turn my camera off for the presentation and then turn it back on for any Q&A at the end, just so you're not disturbed by me blowing my nose or anything silly like that. So I've got the brief that Kate gave me was to have a bit of a whistle-stop tour for wildlife watching within the county, specifically in October, and not aimed at people with any previous level of experience. So there'll be some really interesting stuff in here. I hope it's all interesting, but there'll be some really simple stuff and some stuff that you might not spot, but I want to tell you about because it is out there and it's fantastic, and it gets me very excited about doing my job. So we've got a range of species to cover, and depending on how long I take going through the presentation will depend upon how much time we've got at the end for questions, because there was a WI meeting that I was presenting to for a 45-minute meeting, and after 90 minutes they'd all fallen asleep and I was still going. So I'll try and be a little bit more disciplined tonight. So we are starting, I hope, with a request from one of Katie and Kate's colleagues at Devon County Council, Mark, who looks after the Grand Western Canal at Tiverton. He saw that I was giving this talk and sent me a quick email, because we collaborate on a nature reserve in East Devon called Knapp Copse, which is a beautiful woodland and grassland site. And he said, please, would you start with kingfishers, because you can see them right now along the Grand Western Canal and other places, and they're one of his favourites. So just for Mark, and seeing as this is a Devon County led project, I thought I couldn't really turn him down. So If you've never gone out looking for a kingfisher before, now is a brilliant time to do it, because all the youngsters have come down from their breeding territories high up in the river watercourse, and they've moved down to their wintering grounds in estuaries and canals, Grand Western, to spend the winter in the slightly warmer microclimate. Because the thing about kingfishers is they are absolutely tiny. The first time you spot one, what strikes you first is how small they are, and what strikes you second is just how such a vivid, colourful bird can be so hidden in amongst the estuary environment. That beautiful azure back and bright orange contrasting chest just hides them somehow. It's really concealing. And so what you need to do to give yourself the best chance of spotting one is to learn their call. And they have a very high pitched, very insistent whistle. You can log on to a website called Xenocanto, which is spelled with an X. And on there, it's a database of birdsong recordings, and it's an amazing resource to tap into. And just play some kingfisher calls on that, because when you're out walking along a riverside at this time of year, you need to keep your ears open for this whistling call, and then suddenly you'll see this flash of electric blue go shooting past just over the top of the water, and that's probably going to be your first glimpse of a kingfisher. Spotting one perched beautifully like this is a rarity, but there's lots of places you can go and look for them. I think this is probably the right place to point out that very few of these photos are my own. I'm not trying to claim credit for any of these pictures. They're here to illustrate the species that I want to enthuse about. There are one or two of mine strewn in amongst, and you'll spot those because I'm quite a clunky photographer. But yeah, I wouldn't want to give anyone the impression that I've been taking these wonderful shots. So a little bit about the kingfisher itself. This is slightly smaller than a sparrow, so it's a really tiny little bird. And for such a beautifully colourful bird, it's unusual in the bird kingdom that the males are slightly less colourful than the females. Normally, in any other bird, apart from maybe shelduck, the females are always cryptically coloured because they're the ones that have to sit on top of the eggs and are exposed. But of course, kingfishers nest in burrows in the bank of the river, and so they're protected by the riverbank. And so both male and females can afford to be the same coloration. However, this shot is of a male kingfisher because it lacks on the base of its bottom mandible, so that's the sort of chin of the beak, it's all black. And if this was a female, it would have a lovely big orange spot. And so the way I tend to remember that is to say that female kingfishers wear lipstick. And if you do get to find a kingfisher perch, because they're very faithful to the perches that they use, and when they find a good fishing perch, they'll come back to it over and over again. So it's worth staking out your local stretch of river. And if you find one, spending some time watching them fish is absolutely amazing. There's a number of fish-eating birds in this presentation today. So I'm going to come back to a lot of different techniques for catching fish if you're a bird, but the kingfisher catches it in its bill. It will preferentially perch above a water body rather than fly, although they can hover if they need to, but that's so much more energetic that they've got to catch an awful load of fish to be successful and to not run out of energy. So they like a perch over the water. They've got a brilliant visual acuity, and when they spot a little stickleback or on the estuary, they might be going after little fry grey mullet. They also eat an awful lot of common prawns in the estuary as well. So they do eat invertebrates as well as fish. And then they'll dive in head first, catch it in their bill, and then they fly back up to their perch, and you'll see them smacking whatever it is they've caught, holding onto its tail, smacking the head and subduing it before they then glug down their meal. Now, no wildlife presentation about Devon would be complete without our newest and rarest mammal. And so it really is important to talk about beavers because they're here, they're doing wonderful things. and they've been here for a very long time without being noticed. I remember when about 10 years ago now, the photograph or the video came to light of a beaver active on the River Otter, and the filmmaker proudly put it onto social media, obviously so excited about what they'd found, and all hell broke loose. And there was so many fears. The knee-jerk reaction was that we'd have to collect them all up out of the river, because goodness alone knows what damage and problems they were going to cause. Fortunately, through a lot of hard work through the community, led by Devon Wildlife Trust as well, and supported by the University of Exeter, the initial knee-jerk reaction was calmed, and Devon Wildlife Trust were given a 5-year project time to monitor the beavers in the wild and to assess what they were actually doing. And then we get to the point in time 3 years ago when the legislation was passed that they are now recognised as a native mammal returning to their native territory, which is a massive step forward. The fear that people have about beavers is one of two things. Firstly, they think they're going to do this and turn all of our rivers into treeless deserts by eating everything that surrounds it. Or some people fear they're going to do this and flood everything. And this is possibly a little more likely. And there are a lot of mitigations that Jake, who's this guy on the right-hand side, and his team have come up with through the course of the initial project. And now Jake works for Natural England as their beaver officer. And they have developed a toolbox of methods that we can persuade beavers to not live in places where they might cause flooding of infrastructure, roads, buildings and such, but they will be allowed to take part and to live in other areas where they're only doing good. And the reason why I picked this photo to illustrate it is that this is a beaver habitat of some 15 years of age. It's a tributary of the River Tail. It's an old water meadow that has long been abandoned. And as you can see, A, it's raining very heavily and my colleagues are getting drenched to the bone. But B, there's a lot of trees in that picture. And as I said, there's been a breeding pair of beavers in that water meadow for at least 15 years now, maybe 12. There's a lot of trees there and none of us are sinking. They have created a wetland in behind those willows. They've excavated canals. They've been busy doing beaver things, and they have created the most amazing natural wetland. And what we're going to see as their natural development and then their natural expansion of range happens across the county, we're going to see wetlands like this popping up, and we've got to help landowners work out how to accommodate this, because they are a brilliant part of our landscape. And if you drive through East Devon now and you come over Daisy Mount and look at the Otter Valley, there is a landscape that has had beavers living wild, living free in that river for at least the last 12 years, possibly longer. And you can see it is a beautiful, very wooded landscape. So the thing to look for if you're out beaver spotting this autumn is their feeding sign. And they have a very characteristic way of felling small saplings. That's their favourite thing to do at this sort of time of year. They're entirely herbivorous, so the fears that they were going to destroy fish stocks by eating them all are completely ecologically unsound. They like, in preference, to eat soft, herby vegetation that's right alongside the river or the water body, because they also love ponds. When that gets in short supply, so as we go on into autumn, leaves on the trees start to fall, they'll then start felling small saplings like this to eat the cambium bark underneath the outer bark. And that's a highly nutritious, very energy rich diet. And what they leave behind are these amazing sort of whittled stems that look like a Boy Scout's been busy with his penknife. In fact, we did get a report of vandalism at a community orchard in Honiton a few years ago, that someone had feared that some people had been busy with a hatchet. And when I turned up to have a look at the damage, it wasn't damage at all. It was the feeding of beavers. And I'm very, very mindful to never use the D word when it comes to this, because this is an animal being itself. And what they produce isn't a treeless environment along the river. It's actually one of coppiced woodland. So a lot of regrowth from the base of the coppice stool, which is where they've nibbled the tree down to. And they prefer those fresh, vigorous growing shoots to anything else. So in a way, they're farming the riverbank for their own food supply. And this is what they like to do best. They like to be sat in the water, safe and feeding on greenery. And that's what we've got to provide for them. And once the legislation had been passed and they were signed off as true native species, funnily enough, a number of populations came to light. So the DWT Exeter University study solely focused on the river otter beavers, on the understanding that those were the only beavers at large in our countryside. And as soon as they got the Bill of Health and it was all legitimate, lo and behold, there's an even bigger population on the Exe, going up as far as the Barle, right up onto Dartmoor. They have got into the Clyst, they're on the Pinbrook just outside Exeter, they're on the Bristol just outside Bath, so they're going to have a hell of a good time in the Roman Baths. They're also a lot in Kent, there's some in the Welsh Marches. They're all over the place, and the fact that they live there, largely unnoticed, gives me huge cause for optimism that they can rub alongside us perfectly happily. And what we'll start to notice is all the benefits they bring, cleaning our watercourses and stopping flooding events by slowing the flow being the two major ones. There's also a lot of hope that they'll be actively sequestering carbon in the water wetlands that they create. So there's a lot of positivity coming from beavers over the next few years. Now, going back to some birds, because I don't want to sort of linger on one group for too long, I have to cover this species, the avocet, because it's one that's very, very close to my heart. At this time of year, they'll be returning to their winter grounds, and in Devon, we have possibly the largest winter population of avocet anywhere in the country, and that's on the Exe estuary. And at this time of year, you'll see them coming back in dribs and drabs, their population slowly building up in number. By the time we get into the beginnings of winter, we could have 500, 600, 700 birds on the Exe estuary. And they all feed upon a really specific shrimp. They take other things, obviously, but they are very fussy eaters, and they particularly like the Corophium volutata shrimp, which is a little mud shrimp that lives in a very specific salinity. So if we've had a lot of rainwater and the River Exe is flowing heavily, the Corophium shrimps will be much further south in the estuary because the salinities push more towards the sea. So after periods of flood, they might be down near the turf locks feeding down there on the mud banks. If we have a period of drought, they might be right the way up at the Goat Walk because the influence of the tidal estuary is outcompeting the influence of the freshwater river running down. So you need to plan your visit based on what the weather conditions have been. And then when you see them, they are simply the most dazzlingly beautiful bird. They are the iconic bird of wetland conservation. They're what obviously is sported on the RSPB logo, and for a good reason, because back in the 1940s, they were all but extinct. And slowly over time, with a lot of work in Norfolk and Suffolk, populations have rebuilt. And the most exciting thing for me is this picture is actually one of mine. And this was the first ever recorded breeding attempt of avocet in Devon, and it was a huge success. Last year, we had a pair turn up in early April. We'd had a couple sort of popping in and out to the lagoon at Blackhole Marsh over the course of late March into early April. And then on the 15th of April, this pair that had looked really interesting flew off and disappeared. And I know it was the 15th because on that day, I put a tweet out on my Twitter stream saying, when are these guys going to do the right thing and breed? And lo and behold, 2 weeks later, they were back and they were seen mating. They were seen nest scraping, which is a behaviour that it stimulates the female to start producing eggs and go into ovulation. And each egg obviously is fertilized separately by the male. Then the shell's formed, and she had 3 eggs, and they brooded them for the 25 days. And then on one day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 little chicks stumbled out of the nest down onto the river and were looked after by the sentry bird, which I presume to be the male, because the female was still on the nest. And the following day, a 3rd one joined them. And they were incredibly successful. The average avocet fledging success is less than half. So if you've got a brood of 4 chicks, you're lucky to get 2 away. This pair breeding in a new place, as I said, they've never bred in human history in Devon. And we built Black Hole Marsh lagoons specifically with this species in mind. And by that, in that time, they weren't even breeding up at Steart Marshes on the River Parrett at Bridgewater. They were nowhere near Devon. So it was a big gamble, and it was a bold decision to go after these. But these 2 young birds raised all 3 chicks to fledging age on the 29th of July. And on the 29th of July, the parent birds left. And that's technically when an avocet fledges. With other species, it's when the chicks leave. But avocets play such an active parenting role. All the while that the female was sat on the eggs, the male was stood sentry and spotting threats from distance and flying up to intercept crows, gulls, buzzards, kestrels, anything that could pose a threat to the eggs and the other bird that would get seen off, and they'd make a big fuss. Sometimes it was the female doing it while the male was sitting, but most of the time it was the male that was on the case and making a huge amount of fuss, seeing off the threat, making them the focal point to ignore the female sat on those vulnerable eggs. And once they hatched, the chicks, as you can see in this photo, the chicks careered off without a care in the world. They have absolutely no concerns, and they have no idea of their own mortality. And it is down to the parent birds to keep up with them and keep them safe. So they're tearing away, going after little tiny flies and midges and things, and the parent birds are on an absolute emotional knife edge, just trying to keep them safe. So on the 29th of July, the chicks, obviously, the parent birds had decided they were big enough to fend for themselves, and the adults flew off, leaving the 3 chicks behind. And by the 5th of August, those 3 had gone as well. They did return this year, and they bred again, but sadly, on about day 20 of the 25-day brooding, the water levels unexpectedly dropped on the lagoon, and judging by the footprints that I found, a fox had padded across the shallow water and had eaten all 3 eggs, which was absolutely heartbreaking. It made me realise how completely blasé I'd been about them coming back, because it was just, they're there, brilliant, again, it's lovely. But it was like a crushing grief period to see them gone. The one glimmer of hope is that they didn't disappear straight away. The adults stuck around for a further 2 weeks. They were nest scraping, they were mating. It was much earlier in the year than last year. So the mating on the 24th of May is 6 weeks later than it was this year. It was mid-March when they were back, and there was no vegetation on anything, and there were no shelduck back either. And so there was very little other birds keeping them guard. So it was a shame, but the fact that once they tried again, failed to produce a second brood, they flew away. And that to me suggests that they are seeing Black Hole as their breeding ground. And once it was clear that they weren't going to be breeding that year, they left it to go back early to their winter grounds, which might be the ex-estuary, it might be the east coast of Britain, it might even be the near continent. It's very hard to tell where these birds are travelling from and to, but I'm hopeful next year we'll see them back. So quickly whizzing through some more of our wading birds that you might see down on estuaries at this time of year, curlew are the absolute doyen of the estuaries. They're the biggest of our wading birds. They've got this beautiful downward curved beak, which is much more usual for waders than the upturned bill of the avocet. And they use that to probe deep into the mud for lugworms and ragworms. They'll also take crabs off the surface. I've seen them tossing those into their mouth. And if it's high tide, they'll be quite happy going off to the coastal salt marsh and freshwater marshes and feeding on those as well. So they're always there to look out for. If you get to see a big flock, look for the ones with the really long beak, and those are the oldest females. The males have got slightly shorter beak. But gorgeous bird, and one of the most beautiful calls on the river in autumn and winter. You'll hear them before you see them. This is what makes looking at birds on the estuary so much fun. It's really tricky. And this is one of our commonest little tiny waders, again, about the size of a sparrow. This is a dunlin. And this beautiful composite image shows how one bird species can look like three different birds depending on when you see it. So on the far left, we've got the winter dunlin plumage, which is a very drab grey with little black flecks and a bright white belly, but always with this very characteristic long downturned bill. In autumn, you'll see them now molting halfway between their summer plumage into their winter plumage. And so they've got this speckled back and the remains of their black belly. And on the right-hand side is the summer plumage, where they have got this really dark belly and contrasting golden upper parts and then a white back. And when they fly, sometimes in really big flocks of 100 birds, they'll jink back from side to side in flight. And it'll look like the flock's pulsing when you see a flash of tummy and then a flash of back. And they all do it in synchronicity, which is incredible to see. And then finally, for the waders, had to finish with the bird that's taken wading to the nth degree. This is a snipe, and you will see them out on the estuary mud, but more often you'll see them in winter on coastal grazing marsh, sometimes up on heathland as well, anywhere that's wet underfoot and boggy, that they can get that ridiculously long bill into the turf and pull out earthworms, leather jackets, anything that's in the mud, they will find with that incredibly sensitive bill. We sort of think of birds' bills being like fingernails and being completely numb. But if you think that bill is about 4 inches long and its eyes are perched right back on the top of its head, giving it brilliant view for predators all around, but it can't see what its bill's probing, it has sensitive pits in the tip of that beak that can feel what's underneath the surface and pull out what it wants to eat and nothing else. And they don't have a very good sense of smell, so it's all done by touch. They are brilliant. If you do disturb one, if you're walking out across the moors or pebble bed heaths or somewhere and one's nearby the path, they make this fabulous squelching noise and fly off in a zigzag. And if they go a long way and fly, it's a snipe. If they go up and then straight down again, it might be a jack snipe. Now, into the woods, because I don't want to just focus on winter bird life or autumn bird life. If we get a lovely spell of mild, wet weather for the next couple of weeks, it is fungus season to go out and spot. And as will become clear from a couple of the species I'm going to look at later, this is a no-eating presentation for fungus. It's really to appreciate their beauty and their tininess as well. This is candle snuff fungus, which grows out of particularly rotting ash limbs. And deadwood is something we have got not enough of in most of our woodlands. We've been so scrupulously clean and tidy and tidying everything away. When a branch falls down, it'll get chopped up into pieces, sometimes put into a habitat pile, or more often than not, taken away and removed. We don't do any of that in our woodlands. We take away as little as possible. We keep the paths clear, but ultimately we're looking to leave wood to rot down. And if it's standing dead wood, all the better, because when you've got the air circulating around a dead limb of a tree, it rots at a much slower rate and has a much longer period where it's interesting for loads and loads of biota. But once it's fallen onto the floor and it starts to rot really quickly, you'll see candle stuff fungus popping up out of the ash limbs, and it's really lovely to see. While you're down there looking for those candle snuff, you might see these little tiny ones, which are called horsehair parasols, and very obvious why they've got the name. The cup just looks like a parachute, and the stem that it grows out of looks like a long, coarse piece of horsehair, and it's almost that size. You can see the sphagnum moss at the bottom there and the little germinating seedlings. This is microscopic level or macro level on the woodland floor. So if you're out in nature, in the woods this time of year, take your time, go slowly, and use all of your senses to spot movement or sound, and get down on your hands and knees and have a good rummage and see what's growing. One that you won't need to look too hard for is the fly garrick. I had a complete brain melt there. I mean, this is the ultimate toadstool from fairy books. You could see a little goblin or a pixie sat illustrated on top of one of those in a Enid Blyton book. And there is a reason why there is a connectivity between sort of myths and folklore and fly garrick. It's because they are deeply hallucinogenic, and they used to be taken deliberately by shaman and witch doctors and people who wanted to get this incredible trip. It is incredibly dangerous, so please don't ever do it, because they are very potent and you can risk death. But it's thought that it inspired Alice in Wonderland with the shrinking and growing element of that story. I don't know whether Lewis Carroll partook in fly garrick himself, but one thing that this fungus does is, with that hallucinogenic quality, it completely removes your perception of scale. Apparently, I've never tried it. And so the things appearing huge when they're tiny and vice versa is actually a physiological outcome of consuming this. It's a member of the Amanita family of fungus, and they all erupt from a sort of egg-shaped cup at ground level. And then the toadstool springs up with that beautiful scarlet cup. The vellum that enwrapped it all creates these little scales that sort of drip down the side of the cup, and eventually it will be completely red without any white speckles at all, as the toadstool spreads and grows. But the Amanita family also contains the most deadly fungus. I told you this wasn't an eating fungus slideshow. This is the death cap. And again, you can see it's growing out of that very characteristic egg-shaped cup at ground level that is common to all the Amanitas. And this one is completely venomous, toxic. It is highly dangerous. But it also kills you in a very strange way. And it's my daughter's favourite anecdote when we're on woodland walks for me to remind them of. So if you're not feeling too queasy and you'll indulge me, I will describe the process you go through if you are foolish enough or unfortunate enough to eat one of these mushrooms. And one is more than enough to kill you. They have a passing resemblance to field mushrooms. That sort of yellow staining to the cap is not always present. So a white mushroom growing out in the woods, they have been mistakenly picked and eaten, and they are reputedly delicious. But please don't try it, because as the name suggests, the death cap leads to massive organ failure, mainly of the liver, but it also destroys the kidneys, and you start spontaneously bleeding, membranes break down, you feel absolutely ghastly, and it can be up to 24, 36 hours after consumption. So it's got a little bit of a sting in its tail there, that it's not always obvious what's caused the problem. But the most ironic thing is that 24 hours before death, you feel absolutely brilliant. You get completely better. You sort of wake up, brush yourself down and get on with things and think that you're out of the woods. And unfortunately, you're not, because it's led to complete organ failure and you fall down dead, and it is not pleasant at all. And these are not uncommon fungus. So it's always important, if you're ever foraging for mushrooms, you're with someone who really knows what they're talking about. And that's why I don't do any mushroom walks myself, because I'm by no means expert enough to show people what to do. But it is a wonderful thing. If you do eat one, the only people who've survived have drunk lots and lots of water, got to hospital very quickly, and then had a liver transplant and kidney transplant as well. So it's not to be messed with. Anyway, on with some cute and cuddly to sort of offset the grisly and grim there. This is one of the species that I referred to earlier that you probably won't see, but is so gorgeous, and it's got a very important part of its life history at this time of year, so it's worth talking about. And this is the dormouse. It's a well-known little mammal, highly endangered, very highly protected. It's illegal to knowingly or recklessly disturb them, their breeding habitat, or their nesting sites. And I've been monitoring and surveying them for the last 17 years at Holliford Woods and for the last 3 years at Nat Copse. But they were the first animal that really sort of spurred my interest in conservation. I was very lucky that my piano teacher, where I grew up in Cheddar, her husband was Mike Woods, who was one of the foremost scientists, ecologists, who worked on dormice back in the 90s. And when I was having my piano lessons, if I'd been a really good boy and done all my revision and practice, then I'd be allowed to go out and see the breeding cages where Mike had his dormice that were then going into the re-colonisation programs that were being done in the early days of the People's Trust for Endangered Species. So I first had my encounter with dormice as a sort of 12-year-old, but it wasn't until I was in my 40s that I actually got my licence to work with them. So I was a bit of a slow burn. It shouldn't take that long. But they were known as the sleeper, and they've got a really misnamed common name of the hazel dormouse. They do eat a lot of hazelnuts, but it only makes up a small proportion of their diet late in the summer, early in the autumn, when they're looking to put on a lot of body weight. The reason why they are the sleeper, and they have to have this long hibernation from, well, it used to be October to April. We're now finding them very active in November and even sometimes into December. So the hibernation is getting shorter in period, and that's probably a direct result of climate change. But the reason they have to do that is because they don't have a cecum, which is a little part of the stomach that other mice, like wood mice and harvest mice, they use that to digest cellulose. So to get the sugars out of a leaf of grass, for example, you have to have symbiotic bacteria living in your tummy to break down the cellulose cell wall and get at that energy store. Wood mice have that with the cecum. Dormice have lost that in the same way that we've lost our appendix, and it's a vestigial organ now in our gut that used to be used for digesting raw meat, but now we cook it, we don't need it, it's gone. These guys live on a diet high in protein, high in sugar, so they'll lick honeydew off aphids. They'll also eat lots of aphids early in the spring. They're a little bit more insectivorous than they are herbivorous, and it's late in the summer, early autumn, when they then fill themselves up on hazelnuts, lots of blackberries. They put on a huge amount of weight. They want to try and get up to sort of mid 20 grams, and then they weave a really tight little nest out of grass and old man's beard bark, low down on the forest floor and woodland floor, and they will sleep their winter out there, where everything comes down. It's proper hibernation. Their heart rate drops to a couple of beats a minute. Their body temperature drops to just above the ambient. And it takes a lot of stored energy, not only to get through that period of hibernation, but also to come out of hibernation and become active again. So the worst thing for dormice is a winter where we get warm spells that wake them up, and then there's no food for them to eat, and they've got to go back into hibernation. So prolonged cool or even cold winters are really good for them. And I think the last mammal of the talk, if you are supremely lucky on one of your river walks, you might see an otter. Sadly, these days, you're more likely to see one knocked on the roadside than alive. But that's because their lifestyle, very much like the dormouse, takes them away from our periods of activity. Otters are mainly nocturnal. They're certainly active very early in the morning and late at night. But in the winter months, they are much more varied in their habits. And if it's cold, they will be hunting during the day. So as we get further through the autumn, the chances of seeing a day active otter are increased. And there were two seen at the beginning of this week at Seaton Wetlands outside the Discovery Hut Hyde, both feeding in one pond at about 8 o'clock in the morning. So it's not too ridiculously early to get up. The big trick to spotting otters is to not take your dog with you. If you do have a dog, the smell is something that really terrifies otters. So my top advice would be go early in the morning, late at night, quietly walk along a riverside or a pond if you know otters are there, and listen out for their splashing. The good news is they are now back and present on all of our rivers in Devon and have been since the early 2000s. And whilst it's horrible to see them knocked on the road, it does give an indication that their populations are buoyant out there. Now, I'm going to go into an invertebrate group now. So if anyone has a fear of spiders, look away for the next 3 slides, but I hope you don't, because I've picked absolute stunners. And autumn, and October in particular, is a brilliant time to get out and see spiders, because these species have spent the whole summer growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is when they're at their magnificent best. This is the orb-web spider, also known as the cross spider or the garden spider, sometimes the garden tiger. Lots and lots of common names for Arrhenius diadematus, which is its scientific name. But they're the ones that you see sat in a huge web waiting for a fly to fly into it, and then they bundle it up with more of their silk and inject it with venom. All spiders have got venom. Most of them have not got any ability to inject it into us, so we don't need to be worried about them. They're a brilliant pest control system, and a garden full of spiders is a pleasant garden to be in. This one you can tell is the male, because just below his face, those two big, almost like spherical objects on his front palps are the palpipeds, and those are used in mating, and it's only the males that have that. But it also means that he is a little tiny minnow compared to the female. I wish I'd put a photo of the female on, because all female spiders are considerably bigger than their male counterparts, and the males have a hell of a job during the mating and will often get eaten, because once you fertilize the female, she can also benefit from a nice highly protein rich meal by eating her mate immediately after. So they've got a variety of techniques to try and stop that, because funnily enough, most male spiders don't want to be eaten. And so they'll vibrate the web, they'll stroke her front legs, they'll sort of do everything to persuade her that they're not lunch and they are a suitor. And then they also disappear after the event very, very quickly. This is one of my favorites. This is the wasp spider, and no prizes for guessing why they get that name. This was when I first started working in conservation in Devon back in 2002. These were restricted to a handful of sites. There was a population along the Exeter Ship Canal, and that was a really exciting thing to have on our doorstep. Now, they're getting to be everywhere in scruffy grass, and they're another orb weaver, but they weave their webs low down in the grass, and they're looking to catch crickets and grasshoppers, because this is a big spider. There was one at Delderfield, our grassland on the coast path at Sidmouth last week that I saw, and her abdomen was the size of my first knuckle of my thumb. She was absolutely enormous. And so they're a big, strong spider. And when a cricket or a grasshopper jumps into that very strong web, she'll pounce on it, grab it, and physically manipulate it and inject it full of her venom. That it also starts to break down and digest the grasshopper before she then sucks it up like a milkshake. It's a wonderfully gruesome way to die. And finally, the largest of our spiders, this is the raft spider, rafting. That's why I picked the photo, because this one is out on top of the water and using the surface tension to support it, because they weigh almost nothing. But again, these are a big spider, and they're even capable of catching small fish. So a little baby stickleback will be lunch for a raft spider. They're not common at all, which I think is a shame, because they are absolutely stunning. But acidic pools and runnels on heathland or moorland, there is a chance you might see them. So have a look out for this beautiful, almost like a velvet brown spider with beautiful pale straw stripes. Now, just to finish off, because they're my favourite group, we're going to have a quick dash around some birds of prey, starting with our smallest. And this is the merlin. And in the winter and autumn months, they are a really good bird to get out and try and see, especially on moorland. So being East Devon based, we don't have any of the moors, but we do have some upland heath or lowland heath, but at the top of the hill. And so they sometimes crop up at the Pebblebed Heaths or Trinity Hill, Heathland near Axminster, but you're going to give yourself a much better chance of seeing one with a day trip up to Dartmoor. And they're a tiny little falcon that flies very low, very fast in a straight line, normally chasing down birds not much smaller than it is. Favourite prey for these is sort of skylarks and meadow pipits and things like that are common or should be common on our moorlands. And they are gorgeous. This is a little female, this one, but the male looks pretty similar. He's just a bit grayer with a grey mask. But they are absolutely lovely. This is my absolute favourite bird in the entire world, and I was lucky enough to grow up with them in Cheddar Gorge when I was growing up, and at that time that was pretty much the only place in the southwest you could see them. Other than that, you'd have to go to the sort of Pembrokeshire coast, and they might be there in the Scottish uplands. But over the last 30 years, thanks to very stringent protection and a let-up of human persecution, although it still sadly does go on, peregrine falcons have flourished, and they've come back, and they are now common in central London. We've got them here in Exeter on St Michael's Church. They're still very heavily protected, but they are a welcome part of my daily life out in the countryside. And watching them, especially at this time of year where the young have fledged but are still rubbish at hunting, watching them hone their craft over the estuary, chasing dunlin and redshank, often fruitlessly, is a fabulous sort of diversion from my work at the time. Once they are adult, though, they are the fastest animal on earth while they're hunting. And what they do is the stoop, which is this. So their hunting technique is to fly very high, often sort of 200 feet, and they have got the most incredible visual acuity. They can see detail from a mile away that we can see reading a book in front of our face. They are incredibly well stocked in the lens department. They've in fact got 2 lenses in their eye, because when they're looking straight down at where their feet are, lo and behold, they've got reading specs and they can see their feet in perfect focus. When they're looking straight ahead, they're looking through binoculars and they can see perfect focus over huge distance. When they spot their favourite prey, which might be a stock dove or a feral pigeon, they're particularly fond of that group of birds, but they will take most bird species. They'll then go into this stoop and they'll tuck the wings in. This one's not at its sort of terminal angle. Often they are going straight down like a bullet. And There are guesses as to what speed they might be hitting. It's certainly over 100 miles an hour. It's probably over 150 miles an hour. The only animal capable of going quicker than a peregrine falcon is us in a plane. It's just absolutely incredible. And to see them in our countryside doing their thing is a complete privilege. They've got a few other adaptations to help them reach such high speeds. I've said about the dual focusing eye, that beautiful moustache stripe which comes down across the cheeks, and they've got very pronounced cheekbones, as all falcons do. That helps to shade out any dazzling from the sun. So they've got quite a big orbital ridge over the top of the eye, and they've got this mustachio stripe down the side. So it's effectively shielding the eye from being dazzled. They've also got relatively large feet, and that's the bit that they hit their prey with, and that's the bit that does the killing. If the impact of a bird hitting another bird at 100 miles an hour hasn't dispatched and broken the pigeon's neck immediately, as often happens, they've got a little tooth in the upper mandible of the beak, and it fits perfectly between two of the vertebrae of the pigeon, and a very quick bite, and it's broken its neck, and it's lunch. And birds of prey will always go for the high value organs first, because in a natural setting, there's every chance that they're going to be frightened off their prey. And so they'll always eat the liver and heart and brain first, and then start working on the muscles, because there's a lower energy payback from those organs compared to the internal organs. And it's just something they do instinctively.
Hi, James.
So,
Sorry to
hello.
jump in there. I think we've only got time for one more species now, so we've got a couple minutes for a Q&A at the end.
Oh gosh, yeah, it's half past, isn't it? Sorry, I thought it was 45 past. Okay,
No worries.
I better just touch upon osprey then, because we have had the most amazing autumn for ospreys in Devon. Autumn for birds starts in late July. I hate to break it to you. So by the time that schools have their summer holidays, the birds are well into their autumn. And on the Axe Estuary, where I'm often based, we had up to 4 birds fishing at any one time. There's been 2 on the Lower Otter Restoration Project at Budleigh Salterton. There's been a number on the Axe Estuary. Every estuary in Devon has had osprey for the last 6 weeks, and they are a beautiful bird to go and see. They've got huge blue feet, massive feet that are designed for hitting fish and then grabbing hold of them, slippery devils. The massive talons on the feet are covered in little combs, which are like sort of extra grip. And you'll see them above the river. They spot a big fish like a grey mullet. They dive feet first into the water, often completely submerging themselves. And then if they're lucky, they'll fly off with a grey mullet like this one's caught just off the Tower Hide at Seaton Wetlands. And we've had a lot of juveniles, and just like the peregrine falcons, they've been practicing how to hunt before they go off on their huge migration down to the Gabon and West Africa. And every time they submerge themselves, when they come back up in midair, they shake like a dog. And that's what this one's just done. And so you've got all those water droplets cascading off the back. So I'm sorry I rushed the end. If you want to get in touch with us, we're at wildeastdevon.gov.uk. That's our email for anything to do with East Devon. And if you'd like to quiz me about anything to do with Devon as a whole, that's my Instagram QR code there. If you scan that, that's on the screen, it'll take you to my Instagram page, and you can send me a message via that.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much, James. Some great insights there of what we can see in Devon. And it's great to hear about all the incredible species that are showing up at Seaton and the south and the north. Like, there's lots going on, especially going into autumn. So if anyone has any questions for James, now is your chance. Please pop them in the Q&A bit, and we'll address them. But I have a question for you, James. So you've talked about a lot of different places, and Seaton Wetlands, I know you're the manager of that, so that must be a particularly special place in your heart. Besides Seaton Wetlands, where is your favourite place in Devon to see stuff in the autumn?
Oh, that's a really good question. I love going out on the X, on the river cruise. That's a really unique way to see wildlife. And there's a whole host of things that you'll see. Not only do you get the birds down on the mud flats, but you'll often see grey seals and even harbour seals as well in there. I've refused to call them common seals because nothing's common these days. So harbour seals are a much nicer name for them. So I do love the X. We've got a reserve down there, but it's intertidal, so we don't do a lot of management work down there. It kind of looks after itself. I love the moors. I mean, in spring and then in autumn, going around the East Dartmoor woodlands at Yarna in particular is an absolute joy. And I love spending time in woods where I'm not walking anywhere. I'm just being in the woods and just slowly perusing around, opening up every sense, my hearing, my visual, and also scent, actually smelling things and really absorbing the woodland while you're there. It's the best way to experience it.
Yeah, I think that's really important, really immersing yourself in it. As you said, all your senses, it hits all of them all at once. There's a lot to see, smell, hear. It's incredible getting out in nature, and we are really privileged here in Devon with all
And
of
we've got
that we
so
have.
much variety as well. We've got the two separate coastlines that are distinctly different. We've got Lundy Island offshore and the estuaries, moorland, and we are spoilt rotten.
Yeah. We have a question from Lucy, and they're asking, how did you start down this career path? I'd love to know.
I've mentioned about the dormice, and so I was very keen on wildlife as a kid, and I knew that I just wanted to work with animals, as a lot of young people do. I decided I wanted to be David Attenborough. That was the ambition. So I went off to Royal Holloway and I did biology and media degree, and wanted to sort of get into BBC Bristol. But David Attenborough is still, thankfully, going strong, and so I found myself. I just got a bog standard engineering industrial PR role in London after uni to earn some money. And then one day saw an advert for publications officer for Devon Wildlife Trust and threw myself into the interview and spent 3 wonderful years working with them before then joining East Devon as their education ranger. And I did 8 years as education ranger. Then went off and worked at Piper's Farm as general farms manager, got myself more experience of physical management of sites, worked with Donkey Sanctuary, getting them into stewardship and things like that, and then saw the role of sites manager for the countryside team advertised a few years later, and was so lucky to scoop what is my absolute dream job.
That sounds great. It's really good to hear that there's different ways that people can get into the industry. There's not one way fits all, so there's a lot of variety.
Yes, I refuse to do the years and years of volunteering and earning nothing, because it shouldn't be that way to get into a job just because you love it. We need good people being well paid for doing such important work. Nature recovery is top of the agenda now, as opposed to 20 years ago when it was seen as a sort of niche thing.
Yeah, that is true. We've got another question. This one's from Mark. What is the best time and place to take children to see beavers?
The best place is along the River Otter, from Otterton heading south. This time of year, I'd go at about tea time, about 5 o'clock, wander along quietly, leave your dog at home again. I mean, people, they completely disregard dogs, but it's just easier not to have that as a distraction, and yet listen out for their splashing. There's a family group down there that are pretty regular. The best thing to look out for, not only those wonderful feeding signs, but a group of people with cameras. And as soon as you see that on the riverbank, go and ask them what they're looking at, and 9 times out of 10 it's either a kingfisher or a beaver.
Yeah, the people with the binoculars as well, they've always got something in their sights. I always ask them for what they're looking at. We've got another question from Nicola. What should I be looking out for specifically in the lower otter over the next couple of weeks?
Well, it's all those estuary specialists that are migrating to spend their winter down there. So the Dunlin, Redshank, Godwit, Curlew. At this time of year, we've got the passage of Wimbrel coming through that are like little miniature curlew with a beautiful dark stripe over the eye and a bit of a shorter beak and a bigger eye proportionally. But yeah, wading birds. And if you're lucky, there's still a few osprey hanging around as well. So well worth trotting down there this weekend.
Brilliant. So we've got one last question. It's regarding the recording. So this recording, once we finish the event and tomorrow I'll publish it, and you should get an email with the recording because you've joined. But we'll also be putting it on our YouTube. So it's on the Devon County Council YouTube on the Devon Local Nature Partnership playlist, and I'll share it on our social media. So we've got Devon Local Nature Partnership, Facebook and Instagram. So if you'd like to follow those for all the updates, and we'll be sharing the recording on there as well. So you can rewatch it, hear these tips again, and share this really insightful knowledge from a local expert with friends and family. So yeah, so we'll wrap it up there. Thank you everyone for engaging, and thank you for coming and joining us on this evening. And a massive, massive thank you to James. That was a brilliant presentation. It was so good to hear about it all. Thank you for your time.
Pleasure. Thank you. Cheers, guys.
Lovely. Right, we'll clock off there. Have a good evening, guys. Thank you. Bye.